Jake Morrison stepped off the transport shuttle and looked up at the massive structure floating in space. Harmony Point was bigger than any space station he had ever seen in pictures. The station spun slowly, creating artificial gravity for the thousands of beings living inside. This would be his home for the next 2 years. He pulled his bag over his shoulder and followed the crowd of students through the docking bay. Around him walked creatures from dozens of different worlds. Some looked almost human. Others were so strange that Jake had to remind himself not to stare. A being made entirely of floating crystals drifted past him, humming softly. 3 small aliens with purple skin and too many eyes scurried by, chattering in high-pitched voices. Jake was one of only 12 humans accepted into the Galactic Council's exchange program this year. Earth was still new to the galactic community, and most species were curious about humans. Some were friendly. Others were cautious. A few were openly hostile, though they kept it to themselves most of the time. The dormitory building was in the eastern section of Harmony Point. Jake found his room assignment on the data pad they had given him at check-in. Floor 7, room 47. He took the elevator up, watching the floor numbers climb. When the doors opened on 7, the first thing he heard was howling. The sound echoed down the corridor, wild and aggressive. Jake stepped out carefully. The hallway was wide and clean, with doors on both sides. About halfway down, he saw them. 5 large creatures that looked like wolves but bigger. They stood on 2 legs like humans, but their bodies were covered in thick fur. Their heads were definitely wolf-like, with long snouts full of sharp teeth and pointed ears that swiveled to catch every sound. The Krell. Jake had read about them during his orientation classes. They were a warrior race, proud and fierce. These were young ones, juveniles sent to learn about other cultures. Right now, they were wrestling with each other in the middle of the hallway, snarling and snapping. One of them howled again, and the others joined in. Jake walked down the corridor, keeping to the side. The Krell noticed him but didn't stop their rough play. One of them, slightly larger than the others, watched Jake with bright yellow eyes. Jake kept walking, found his room, and went inside. The room was small but comfortable. 1 bed, 1 desk, 1 chair, and a private bathroom. A window showed the stars outside, distant and cold. Jake unpacked his belongings, listening to the sounds from the hallway. The howling came and went. Sometimes he heard running footsteps and shouts in languages he didn't understand. Over the next few days, Jake learned the rhythm of life on floor 7. The Krell cubs owned the hallway. That was clear from the start. They roamed in a pack, loud and aggressive. The largest one seemed to be their leader. Jake heard other students call him Vrak. Most students avoided the Krell. The small purple aliens called Quellans practically ran to their rooms when the cubs appeared. The crystalline Vesh students would dim their glow and drift close to the walls. Even the Zenthari, who were tall and proud, gave the Krell plenty of space. Jake watched and learned. He saw how the cubs acted. They weren't actually attacking anyone. They were testing, pushing, seeing who would back down. When someone showed fear, the Krell pushed harder. They would block doorways, growl at students trying to pass, and howl outside rooms at random hours. It was all about dominance. On his 4th day, Jake met his neighbor. Lisa Chen was human too, one of the other 11 in the program. She was studying xenobiology like him, specializing in crystalline life forms. She knocked on his door one evening, introducing herself. "You're the new guy on the Krell floor," she said, shaking his hand. "Bad luck with the room assignment." "It's not so bad," Jake replied. Lisa raised an eyebrow. "You say that now. Wait until they decide you're interesting. 3 students have already requested transfers. Station security won't do anything unless someone gets hurt." "Why do they act like this?" Jake asked. Lisa shrugged. "They're young, far from home, and nobody knows how to handle them. Their culture is all about strength and pack hierarchy. Without proper leadership, they just run wild. The professors say it's a cultural thing and we should respect it." "Respect them terrorizing other students?" "Exactly. It's a mess." Lisa glanced down the hallway where rough laughter echoed. "Just keep your head down and don't make eye contact." That's what everyone else does. But Jake couldn't help noticing things. He grew up on a farm in Montana, raising and training working dogs. His family bred German shepherds for search and rescue work. He knew dog behavior inside and out, and watching the Krell cubs, he saw patterns he recognized. The way Vrak held himself above the others, the way the pack looked to him for signals, the constant testing of boundaries, the rough play that established and reinforced hierarchy. These weren't random acts of aggression. This was a pack without proper structure, without an alpha they respected. Jake started paying more attention. He watched how the cubs interacted with different species. They mostly ignored the Vesh, who had nothing the Krell wanted. They mocked the Zenthari, who responded with cold disdain. But the Quellans got the worst of it. The small rabbit-like aliens triggered something in the Krell, some predator instinct that made the cubs chase and corner them. One evening, Jake was studying in his room when he heard a commotion outside. He opened his door and looked out. The Krell were having one of their howling sessions, all 5 of them standing in a circle, heads thrown back, voices rising and falling in an eerie harmony. The sound was impressive, Jake had to admit, wild and powerful. But it was late, and other students were trying to sleep or study. Doors remained firmly shut. No one dared complain. Jake stepped into the hallway. He didn't approach the Krell, just stood near his door. Vrak noticed him first. The lead cub stopped howling and stared at Jake. The others fell silent one by one, following their leader's attention. Jake met Vrak's eyes. He didn't look away, didn't show fear, but he didn't show aggression either. Just calm, steady eye contact. After a moment, he turned and went back into his room, closing the door quietly behind him. The howling didn't resume that night. The next day, Jake noticed Vrak watching him in the hallway. The big cub sat near the elevator, apparently waiting for something. When Jake walked past on his way to class, Vrak's eyes followed him. Jake nodded slightly, the way he might acknowledge a dog back home, and kept walking. In class, his Zenthari professor was discussing pack behavior in various species. The professor, a tall being with silver skin and 3 arms, talked about hierarchy and social structure. Jake listened carefully, connecting what he learned to what he observed. Many species require clear leadership, the professor explained. Without it, social groups become unstable. Young individuals especially need guidance to develop properly. When that guidance is absent, behavioral problems emerge. Jake thought about the Krell cubs. They were far from their homeworld, surrounded by species that either feared them or dismissed them. No one treated them like students who needed help. Everyone just saw them as problems to avoid. That night, the howling started again around midnight. Jake lay in bed listening. It went on for almost an hour. He heard doors opening, heard angry voices shouting in various languages, heard the Krell snarling back. Finally, silence fell. Jake stared at the ceiling, thinking. He had a choice. He could be like everyone else, avoid the cubs, request a room transfer, complain to administration, or he could try something different. He thought about the working dogs back home, the ones who came to his family's farm with behavior problems. Dogs that other trainers had given up on. His father always said the same thing. A problem dog wasn't a bad dog, just a dog that needed proper leadership and clear boundaries. Maybe the same principle applied here. Jake decided to wait and watch a bit longer. He needed to understand the pack better before he acted, but he had a feeling that sooner or later something would force his hand. He was right about that. 2 weeks passed on Harmony Point. Jake fell into a routine. Morning classes in xenobiology, afternoons in the research labs, evenings studying or exploring the station. The Krell cubs continued their dominance games in the hallway. Jake continued watching them, learning their patterns. He noticed that Vrak always ate first when the pack shared food. The others waited even when they were clearly hungry. He saw how the cubs communicated with body language, ear positions, and subtle growls that carried meaning. He watched how they tested each other constantly, maintaining their hierarchy through small challenges and submissions. The other students thought Jake was crazy for not requesting a transfer. Lisa stopped by his room regularly, updating him on the latest incidents. A Quellan student had been trapped in the bathroom for 3 hours while the cubs prowled outside. 2 Zenthari had gotten into a shouting match with Vrak, which nearly turned physical. Station security had to break it up. "They're getting worse," Lisa said one evening, sitting at Jake's desk while he lay on his bed. "The administration is talking about sending them back to their homeworld. Apparently, this exchange program is important for diplomatic relations, but not if someone gets seriously hurt." "They won't hurt anyone," Jake said. "How do you know that?" "Because they haven't yet. If they wanted to hurt people, they would have. They're testing boundaries, not looking for blood." Lisa looked skeptical. "Tell that to the Quellan who almost had a heart attack last week." Jake sat up. "That's exactly what I mean. They cornered him, scared him, but they didn't touch him. It's all intimidation. That's supposed to make it better? No, but it means something. They're looking for someone to push back. Well, I hope you're not planning to be that someone. You saw how big they are, Jake had seen. Vrak stood nearly 7 feet tall with muscles rippling under his dark fur. His claws were as long as human fingers and his teeth could easily tear through flesh. The other 4 cubs were only slightly smaller. Any one of them could kill a human without much effort. But Jake had been bitten by dogs before. He had faced down aggressive animals that outweighed him. The trick was never showing fear, never backing down, but also never escalating to real violence. Confidence and calm authority worked better than strength. The incident happened on a Friday evening. Jake was returning from the research labs carrying a data pad with notes from his latest assignment. He was tired, thinking about dinner, not paying much attention to his surroundings. He stepped off the elevator on floor 7 and immediately knew something was wrong. The hallway was too quiet. Then he heard it, a high-pitched whimpering sound full of terror. Jake walked around the corner and saw the scene. A Quellen student, one of the smallest Jake had seen, was pressed against the wall near the bathroom. The 5 Krell cubs formed a semicircle around him, blocking any escape. They weren't touching the alien, but they were close, so close. Their lips were pulled back, showing teeth. Low growls rumbled from their throats. The Quellen was frozen in absolute fear. His large eyes were wide, his small body trembling. His purple skin had gone pale, almost white. Jake knew enough about Quellens to know that color change meant extreme stress. The alien might actually die from fear. Other students watched from doorways, but no one moved to help. What could they do? The Krell were bigger and stronger than most species on this floor. Getting involved would just make things worse. Vrak made a mock lunge at the Quellen. The alien squeaked and tried to press himself flatter against the wall. The cubs thought this was hilarious. They barked out laughing sounds, tails wagging. Jake didn't think. He just acted. He walked straight toward the group, his footsteps loud in the quiet hallway. The cubs heard him coming. Their heads turned. Vrak saw Jake first and his ears went up, surprised. Jake didn't slow down. He walked right up to the group and stepped between Vrak and the Quellen. He put himself directly in front of the terrified alien, facing the 5 Krell cubs alone. The hallway went completely silent. Everyone was watching now, doors open all along the corridor. Jake could feel dozens of eyes on him. Vrak stared at Jake. The big cub's yellow eyes were bright with surprise and something else. Challenge. He took a step closer, looming over Jake. The human was tall for his species, but Vrak was taller. The cub growled, deep and threatening. Jake didn't move. He looked directly into Vrak's eyes and held the gaze. No fear, no aggression, just complete calm. He didn't speak, didn't gesture, just stood there like a wall between the Krell and their prey. Behind Jake, the Quellen whimpered again. Jake heard the alien's rapid breathing, could almost feel the terror radiating from him, but he didn't look away from Vrak. This moment was critical. If he showed weakness now, if he broke eye contact or stepped back, the cubs would never respect him. Worse, they might actually attack. Vrak's growl grew louder. He leaned forward, bringing his snout close to Jake's face. Jake could smell his breath, hot and meat-scented, could see every tooth in that powerful jaw. One bite could take Jake's head off. But Jake had faced down angry German shepherds before, dogs that had been abused or poorly trained, dogs that thought aggression was the answer to everything. The principle was the same. Show no fear. Claim your space. Wait. The other 4 cubs shifted nervously. They looked at Vrak, waiting for their leader to decide what to do. This was new territory for them. No one had ever stood up to them like this before. Everyone else either ran or submitted. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. Jake's heart was pounding, but he kept his breathing steady, his posture relaxed but firm. He wasn't challenging Vrak, but he wasn't backing down either. He was simply there, immovable, a fact that Vrak had to deal with. Finally, something changed in Vrak's eyes. His ears, which had been forward and aggressive, flattened slightly. It was a tiny change, but Jake caught it. The cub's growl faded. He pulled his head back a few inches. Jake didn't smile or show triumph. He just kept looking at Vrak, calm and steady. Vrak turned his head away, breaking eye contact. He looked at his pack, then back at Jake. Then he did something that surprised everyone watching. He stepped back. The other cubs immediately moved with him, following their leader's retreat. They backed up several feet, no longer blocking the corridor. Vrak huffed once, a sound that might have meant anything, then turned and walked away. His pack followed, tails low, glancing back at Jake uncertainly. Jake waited until they disappeared around the far corner. Then he turned to the Quellan. The small alien was still pressed against the wall, shaking. His eyes were huge as he stared at Jake. "You're safe now," Jake said softly. "Go to your room." The Quellan nodded frantically and bolted, running on his short legs as fast as he could manage. He disappeared into a room 3 doors down. Jake heard the lock engage. Jake looked around. All along the hallway, students were staring at him. He saw amazement, shock, and fear on various alien faces. Lisa stood in her doorway, her mouth hanging open. Jake walked to his room, went inside, and closed the door. His hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. He sat on his bed and took several deep breaths. That had been dangerous, possibly stupid, but it had worked. For now, he knew this wasn't over. The Krell would be back. They would test him again, probably harder next time. He had challenged their dominance, stepped into their hierarchy. They would need to figure out where he fit, and that process wouldn't be peaceful. Jake lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. He thought about calling his parents, telling them what happened. But what would he say? That he had faced down 5 alien wolf warriors to save a rabbit alien he didn't even know? They would think he was insane. Maybe he was. A knock on his door made him jump. He got up and opened it carefully. Lisa stood there, her expression somewhere between impressed and horrified. "Are you crazy?" she demanded, pushing past him into the room. "Do you have any idea what you just did? Helped someone who needed it. You could have been killed. Those are Krell, Jake, warriors. They could have torn you apart, but they didn't. This time. What about next time? Because there will be a next time. You just made yourself their new favorite target." Jake nodded slowly. "I know. And you did it anyway?" "Someone had to." Lisa shook her head, but there was respect in her eyes now. "You're either the bravest human I've ever met or the dumbest." "I haven't decided which. Can't I be both?" Despite herself, Lisa laughed. Then her expression turned serious again. "Be careful, Jake, really. The Krell don't forget challenges. They'll come for you. Let them come." After Lisa left, Jake tried to study but couldn't concentrate. He kept replaying the confrontation in his mind, analyzing every detail. Vrak had backed down, but not because he was afraid. It was something else. Respect, maybe. Or curiosity. The Cubs had been testing boundaries for weeks, pushing everyone around them, and no one had pushed back. Until now. Jake had shown them something they hadn't seen before. Someone who wouldn't be intimidated but also wouldn't attack. Someone who claimed his space calmly and held it. That night, Jake lay in bed listening for howling. But the hallway remained quiet. Maybe the Cubs were thinking about what happened. Maybe they were planning their response. Either way, Jake knew his life on Harmony Point had just gotten a lot more complicated. The testing began the very next day. Jake woke to the sound of howling right outside his door. Not the distant corridor howling he had gotten used to, but loud, aggressive howling that made his walls vibrate. He checked the time. 5 in the morning. Jake got out of bed and walked to his door. He pressed the button to open it. All 5 Krell Cubs stood in the hallway facing his room. Vrak was closest, his head thrown back, howling at the ceiling. The others joined in, creating a sound that hurt Jake's ears. Several doors opened. Students looked out, annoyed and frightened. Jake stepped into the hallway in his sleep clothes, barefoot. He looked at Vrak and waited for the Cub to notice him. Vrak stopped howling and stared at Jake. His pack fell silent. The big Cub's ears were forward, his tail raised. "Clear challenge, it's too early," Jake said calmly. "People are trying to sleep. Take it somewhere else." Vrak showed his teeth. The other Cubs tensed, waiting for the signal to attack or retreat. The hallway held its breath. Jake didn't back down. He just stood there in his sleeping clothes, looking completely unbothered by the 5 large predators in front of him. After a long moment, Vrak huffed and turned away. He walked down the hallway and his pack followed. But Jake noticed something. Vrak looked back twice, checking to see if Jake was watching. He was. Jake went back inside and tried to sleep, but the adrenaline made it impossible. He lay in bed knowing this was just the beginning. He was right. Over the next week, the Krell Cubs made Jake their special project. They howled outside his door at random hours. They blocked his path in the hallway, making him walk around them. They followed him to the elevator, to class, to the cafeteria. Always watching, always testing. Jake never showed fear. When they howled, he told them to be quiet. When they blocked his path, he walked through them like they were furniture. When they followed him, he ignored them. He never raised his voice, never made threats, never showed aggression. Just calm, absolute certainty that they would not intimidate him. Other students watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. Lisa checked on him daily, convinced he would eventually be attacked. The Xanthari students started taking bets on how long Jake would last. Even the Vesh, who normally ignored drama, paid attention. But Jake noticed things others didn't. The Cubs never actually touched him. Their mock charges always stopped just short. When they blocked his path and he walked forward, they moved at the last second. Their growls were loud but lacked the deep, serious tone of real threat. They were testing him, not trying to hurt him. It was exactly like working with young, untrained dogs. They pushed boundaries to see what they could get away with, to figure out the pack structure, to find their place in the hierarchy. The problem was no one else understood this. Everyone saw dangerous predators. Jake saw confused kids. On the 8th day of constant harassment, something changed. Jake was in the common room, studying at one of the tables. The room was large and open, with comfortable chairs and study spaces. Several students were there, including 3 Xanthari and a pair of Vesh. The Krell Cubs entered like they owned the place. They spread out, taking up space, making noise. Most students gathered their things and left quickly. Jake stayed, focusing on his datapad. Vrak approached Jake's table. He stood there, looming, breathing heavily. Jake could smell the Cubs' scent, musky and wild. He finished reading the paragraph he was on, then looked up. "Can I help you?" Jake asked, as if Vrak were a classmate asking about homework. Vrak's ears twitched. He seemed confused by Jake's casual tone. He growled, showing teeth. Jake returned his attention to his datapad. "If you're not going to say anything useful, I'm busy." One of the other Cubs, a female with lighter fur, made a barking laugh sound. Vrak's head snapped toward her and she immediately went silent, ears flattening in submission. Vrak looked back at Jake, who was still reading. The big Cub reached out with one clawed hand and pushed Jake's datapad, sliding it across the table. Jake calmly retrieved the pad, put it back in front of him, and continued reading. Vrak pushed it again, harder this time. It slid off the table and clattered to the floor. Jake stood up, picked up the pad and checked it for damage. Satisfied it was fine, he put it in his bag. Then he looked at Vrak. Really looked at him, meeting those yellow eyes directly. "I'm going to the library," Jake said. "You can follow me if you want, but you're going to be quiet while I study." "Understood?" He didn't wait for a response. He walked past Vrak, past the other Cubs, and out of the common room. Behind him he heard confused huffing and whispering in the Krell language. Then he heard footsteps following. All 5 Cubs followed him to the library. It was a massive space, 3 levels tall, filled with data terminals and reading areas. The librarian, a silver-skinned Xanthari, looked alarmed when she saw the Krell enter. "They're with me," Jake said. "They'll be quiet." The librarian looked skeptical but nodded. Jake found a study desk near the back and sat down. He pulled out his datapad and started working on his assignment for xenobiology class. The Cubs stood around uncertainly. They were used to causing chaos, to people fleeing from them. Jake's complete lack of reaction seemed to confuse them. Finally, one by one, they settled on the floor around Jake's desk. Not close enough to crowd him, but within sight. An hour passed. Jake worked steadily. The Cubs dozed or watched other students. When one started to make noise, Vrak would growl softly, and the offender would quiet down. Jake pretended not to notice, but he was very aware of what was happening. Vrak was enforcing Jake's command for quiet. That was significant. After 2 hours, Jake stood up to leave. The Cubs immediately got up too. Jake walked to the elevator and they followed. When he got to floor 7 and walked to his room, they trailed behind like a strange parade. Jake went into his room and closed the door. Through the wall, he heard them settle in the hallway outside. Lisa knocked on his door 10 minutes later. When Jake opened it, she stared at the Cubs lying in the corridor. "What did you do?" she whispered. "Studied in the library." "Why are they camped outside your door?" "I don't know. Maybe they like me." "Jake, this is insane." "Probably." But over the next few days, a pattern emerged. The Cubs still howled sometimes, but less often. They still followed Jake around campus, but they were quieter about it. When other students passed by, the Cubs would watch them but not harass them. It was like Jake's presence calmed them down. The change didn't go unnoticed. Professors started commenting on it. The station administration sent someone to interview Jake, asking how he had managed to influence the Krell behavior. Jake tried to explain about pack dynamics and leadership, but he could tell they didn't really understand. What Jake understood was this: the cubs were far from home, surrounded by species they didn't respect and who didn't respect them. They had no structure, no guidance, no one to tell them what was acceptable. They were acting out because that's what young pack animals do when they're lost and confused. Jake didn't try to dominate them through force. He didn't threaten or punish. He just showed them through his actions that there was someone who wouldn't be intimidated, who had clear boundaries, who could be trusted to be consistent. Vrak, as the pack leader, was the key. He needed to respect someone before his pack would follow, and slowly, carefully, Jake had earned that respect, not through violence or aggression, but through calm, unwavering confidence. 2 weeks after the incident in the hallway, Jake was walking back from an evening class when Vrak approached him alone. The big cub fell into step beside Jake, matching his pace. They walked in silence for a while. "Why do you not fear us?" Vrak asked suddenly. His voice was deep and rough, his English heavily accented but understandable. Jake considered the question. "Should I? Most do. Most haven't spent much time around predators. I have." "You are prey," Vrak said. But there was curiosity in his tone, not accusation. "Humans are complicated," Jake replied. "We're prey and predator both. Depends on the situation." They reached the dormitory building. Vrak stopped at the entrance. "You are strange," he said. "So I've been told. My pack, they talk about you. They do not understand. Do you understand?" Vrak's ears swiveled thoughtfully. "No, but I think I want to." That night, the howling was different. Quieter, almost musical. When Jake looked out his door, he saw the cubs sitting in a circle, howling together in harmony. It wasn't aggressive or intimidating. It was beautiful. One of the Zenthari students stood in his doorway listening. "I didn't know they could sound like that," he said to Jake. "Neither did I," Jake admitted. Things were changing on floor 7. The cubs were still cubs, still rough and wild, but they were finding their place, figuring out how to exist in this strange environment so far from their homeworld. And somehow, a human from Montana who knew how to train dogs had become the unlikely guide they needed. But Jake knew this fragile peace wouldn't last forever. Something would test it eventually. Life on a space station full of different species was never simple for long. The question was whether the bonds he was building with the Krell would be strong enough to survive whatever came next. He would find out sooner than he expected. The alarm woke Jake from a deep sleep. It was a harsh electronic wail that made his teeth hurt. Red emergency lights flashed in his room, painting everything in shades of blood. He sat up, confused and disoriented. The chronometer on his wall showed 2:17 in the morning. A voice came over the station-wide speakers, calm but urgent. "All students return to dormitories immediately. This is not a drill. Station lockdown is now in effect. Return to your dormitories and remain in your rooms until further notice." Jake got out of bed and pulled on clothes quickly. Through his window, he could see security shuttles moving through space around the station, their lights flashing. Something bad was happening. He opened his door and looked into the hallway. Students were emerging from their rooms, speaking in dozens of languages, voices high with fear. The Zenthari students clustered together, their silver skin gleaming in the red emergency lights. The Vesh students floated close to the ceiling, their crystalline bodies chiming with anxiety. The Quellans huddled in doorways, too scared to venture out. At the far end of the corridor, the Krell cubs had gathered outside their den. All 5 of them were pacing, agitated and tense. Their ears swiveled constantly, catching sounds from all over the station. Vrak's hackles were raised, making him look even larger than usual. Lisa appeared from her room, her face pale. "Did you hear the announcement?" "What's happening?" "I don't know," Jake said. "Some kind of emergency." The speakers crackled to life again. "Attention all station residents. An incident has occurred in the diplomatic sector. Security forces are responding. Please remain calm and stay in your designated areas. More information will be provided as it becomes available." "Diplomatic sector," Lisa repeated. "That's where the ambassadors have their offices." "This is bad, Jake, really bad." Other students were talking in clusters, their voices rising in panic. Jake caught fragments of conversation in languages he understood. Attack, someone said. Violence, said another. We're trapped here, a third voice wailed. The Krell cubs' agitation increased. They started howling, but not like before. This was different, more primal. It was an alarm call, the sound predators make when danger is near. The howling echoed through the corridor, adding to the general panic. More students emerged from their rooms, some crying, some angry, all afraid. The hallway was filling with bodies, with voices, with fear that hung in the air like smoke. We need to get back in our rooms, Lisa said, pulling at Jake's arm. That's what they told us to do. But Jake was watching the Krell. They were bunching together, forming a defensive circle, facing outward. Their tails were low, their teeth bared. They looked ready to attack anything that came near. The howling grew louder. Other students started shouting at the cubs to be quiet, which only made things worse. Someone threw something, a data pad, that clattered against the wall near Vrak. The big cub snarled, taking an aggressive step forward. This was going to spiral out of control fast. Jake could see it happening. The cubs were scared and falling back on instinct. Fight or flight, and Krell didn't flight. Without thinking it through, Jake walked into the hallway. Lisa called after him, but he ignored her. He walked straight toward the pack of agitated, snarling Krell cubs. Students pressed themselves against walls, trying to get away from both the cubs and the crazy human walking toward them. Jake heard whispers in a dozen languages, all saying essentially the same thing. He was going to get killed. Vrak saw Jake approaching. The cub's eyes were wild, pupils dilated with fear-driven aggression. His claws were extended, scraping the floor. The other cubs crowded behind him, making sounds that were half howl, half growl. Jake stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to be heard clearly, far enough to give them space. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make sudden movements. He just stood there calm in the middle of the chaos. Vrak, he said. Just the name, nothing else. The big cub's ears swiveled toward him. The howling faltered. It's okay, Jake continued, using the same tone he used with scared dogs. Calm, confident, soothing. I know you're scared. Everyone's scared. But howling isn't helping. Vrak's lips were still pulled back, showing all his teeth. But his eyes were locked on Jake now, focusing. Look at me, Jake said. Just look at me. You're safe. Your pack is safe. I won't let anything hurt you. It was a promise he had no way of keeping, but he said it with such certainty that it sounded like truth. He took a step closer. Quiet now, Jake said. I need you to be quiet. Can you do that for me? Vrak's howling faded to a low whine. The other cubs were watching him, waiting for their leader to tell them what to do. The entire hallway was silent except for that whine and the distant alarm. Jake took another step. Good, that's good. Now sit down. Vrak didn't move. His muscles were tense, coiled springs ready to unleash. Jake could see the internal struggle in the cub's eyes. Instinct told him to fight or flee. But something else, something Jake had been building over the past weeks, was pulling him in a different direction. Sit, Jake repeated, firm, but not harsh. Guard the door. It was a command with purpose. Not just sit and do nothing, but sit and do something important. Protect. That was what warriors did. That was what the Krell understood. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Vrak slowly lowered himself to a sitting position, facing the main corridor entrance to the floor. His eyes never left that entrance. One by one, the other 4 cubs followed their leader. They arranged themselves in a line, a defensive position, facing outward. The howling stopped. Jake let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Around him, students stared in disbelief. He had just commanded 5 terrified warrior cubs to stand down, and they had listened. Stay here, Jake said to the cubs. Watch the door. Keep everyone safe. Vrak's ears flicked in acknowledgement. The big cub settled more firmly into position, his pack beside him ready to defend their territory if needed. Jake turned to face the other students. Everyone should get back in their rooms, he said. Stay calm. We're safe here. Lisa came to his side. That was insane, she whispered. It worked. This time. Jake went back to his room but left his door open. He could see the cubs from here, sitting in their defensive line. Other students slowly returned to their rooms, though many also left doors open, too nervous to be completely shut in. The emergency alarm continued to wail. The speakers periodically updated them with minimal information. An incident in the diplomatic sector. Security responding. Stay in your designated areas. Hours crawled by. Jake tried to rest but couldn't sleep. Every time he checked the hallway, the cubs were still there. Still sitting, still watching. Vrak occasionally looked back toward Jake's room as if confirming he was still there, then returned his attention to the corridor entrance. Around 4 a.m, a Quellan student emerged from his room needing to use the bathroom. The small alien froze when he saw the Krell. The cubs tensed, aware of him, but they didn't move from their positions. Vrak's eyes tracked the Quellan's movements, but he remained seated. The Quellan hurried to the bathroom and back, eyeing the cubs nervously the entire time. They let him pass without incident. More students ventured out as the night wore on. Some needed water. Some couldn't stay in their rooms anymore, too frightened or restless. Each time the cubs watched but didn't interfere. They had a job now, a purpose. Guard the door. Keep everyone safe. They took it seriously. Lisa brought cups of water to the cubs around 5 a.m. She approached cautiously, hands visible, moving slowly. She set the cups on the floor within reach and backed away. Vrak sniffed the nearest cup, then drank deeply. The others followed his lead. When they finished, they returned to their positions. "I never thought I'd be giving water to Krell warriors," Lisa said, returning to Jake's room. "They're just kids," Jake said. "Scared kids who needed someone to tell them what to do." "You told 5 armed predators to sit and guard a door, and they obeyed." "That's not normal, Jake. Nothing about this situation is normal." As dawn approached, or what passed for dawn in the eternal artificial day-night cycle of the station, the alarm finally stopped. The red light switched back to normal white. The speakers crackled. "Attention all station residents. The emergency situation has been contained. Security forces have apprehended the individuals responsible for the incident in the diplomatic sector. Lockdown protocols are being lifted. Normal operations will resume at 800 hours. We apologize for the disruption and thank you for your cooperation." A collective sigh of relief swept through Floor 7. Students emerged from their rooms talking excitedly, sharing their experiences of the night. The tension began to drain away. The Krell cubs remained at their posts. They didn't move until Jake walked over to them. "It's okay now," he said. "The danger has passed." "You did good." Vrak stood slowly, stretching muscles that had been held tense for hours. The other cubs did the same. They looked tired, but also different somehow. More settled. Like they had found something they had been missing. Vrak approached Jake. For a moment, Jake wondered if he had pushed his luck too far, if the cubs would now see him as someone who could command them and reject that control. But Vrak didn't attack. He lowered his head and pressed it briefly against Jake's shoulder, a gesture Jake recognized from his research. It was how Krell warriors acknowledged their pack leader, a sign of respect and loyalty. Morning came to Harmony Point with exhausted students stumbling to breakfast. The cafeteria was crowded with beings from dozens of species, all talking about the previous night. Details about the incident were spreading through the station. A group of extremists from the Dracon sovereignty had tried to plant a bomb in the diplomatic wing. Station security stopped them, but it had been close. Jake sat at a table with Lisa, eating something that was supposed to resemble scrambled eggs. He was so tired that everything seemed slightly unreal. "You're famous," Lisa said, sliding her datapad across the table. Jake looked at the screen. Someone had recorded video of him approaching the Krell cubs during the emergency. The footage showed Jake walking calmly toward 5 snarling predators, speaking to them, watching them sit and take up guard positions. The video had thousands of views already and was spreading across the station network. "Great," Jake muttered. "People are calling you the Krell Whisperer," Lisa said with a grin. "There's a whole discussion thread about how you did it. Some people think you used pheromones. Others think you have some kind of psychic ability. I just talked to them. Jake, nobody just talks to Krell cubs, especially not when they're scared and aggressive." Before Jake could respond, a Zenthari professor approached their table. It was Professor Helen Grant, who taught advanced xenopsychology. She was tall and silver-skinned with 3 arms and deep-set eyes that seemed to see everything. "May I sit?" she asked. Jake nodded, suddenly nervous. Professors usually didn't seek out students in the cafeteria unless something was wrong. Professor Grant folded herself into a chair, her 3 arms moving with elegant coordination. "I watched the video from last night," she said. "I've also been observing the changes in Krell behavior over the past few weeks. I'm curious about your methods." "I don't have methods," Jake said. "I just treated them like I would treat dogs back home." "Dogs." Professor Grant repeated thoughtfully. Explain. So Jake did. He told her about growing up on a farm in Montana, about his family's work breeding and training German shepherds for search and rescue. He explained how pack dynamics worked, how young dogs needed clear leadership and consistent boundaries, how showing fear or aggression usually made things worse, how calm confidence could turn a troubled dog into a loyal companion. And you applied these principles to the Krell, Professor Grant said. I saw the same patterns. They weren't being aggressive because they were mean. They were acting out because they were lost. No structure, no leadership, no purpose. Just 5 kids far from home with no idea how to fit in. Most species don't understand Krell behavior, Professor Grant said. We see warriors and predators. We react with fear or try to establish dominance through force. Both responses trigger their aggression. They just needed someone who wasn't afraid but also wasn't trying to fight them, Jake said. Professor Grant was quiet for a moment. Her 3 hands steepled together. Would you be willing to present your observations to the Xenopsychology Department? What you've accomplished could change how we approach interspecies youth programs. I'm just a student. You're a student who achieved what our trained counselors could not. That's worth discussing. Jake agreed, mostly because saying no to a professor seemed like a bad idea. After Professor Grant left, Lisa gave him an amused look. First you're famous, now you're going to teach professors. What's next? Hopefully sleep, Jake said. I'm exhausted, but sleep would have to wait. When Jake and Lisa returned to floor 7, they found a small crowd gathered in the hallway. Station security officers were there, along with what looked like administrators. And sitting calmly in the middle of everything were the 5 Krell cubs. Brock saw Jake and immediately stood up. The other cubs followed. They padded over to Jake, ignoring everyone else, and arranged themselves around him in a loose protective formation. One of the administrators, a Zenthari with green-tinted skin, approached carefully. You're Jake Morrison? Yes. I'm Administrator Kyle Bennett. I need to speak with you about the events of last night. They moved to a conference room down the hall. The cubs tried to follow, but Jake told them to wait outside. Vrak looked unhappy about it but obeyed, settling near the door with his pack. Inside the conference room, Kyle got straight to the point. What you did last night was dangerous and technically violated lockdown protocols. However, it also prevented what could have been a violent incident. The cubs were close to attacking other students. They were scared, Jake said. Nevertheless, you took a considerable risk. We need to understand how you were able to influence their behavior. The Krell government has been asking difficult questions about why their youth are struggling to adapt. Your success could help answer those questions. Jake repeated his explanation about pack dynamics and leadership. Kyle listened carefully, making notes on his datapad. The Galactic Council has been struggling with youth exchange programs, Kyle said. Many species find it difficult to integrate young individuals from warrior cultures. If your approach could be taught to others, it might solve a significant diplomatic problem. I don't know if it can be taught, Jake said honestly. It's not really a technique. It's just understanding what they need. That understanding is valuable regardless. Would you be willing to continue working with the cubs, officially as part of a pilot program? Jake thought about it. What would that involve? Mentoring them, helping them adapt, teaching them how to interact with other species appropriately. You'd receive credit toward your degree and a small stipend. More importantly, you'd be helping create a framework for future programs. It was a lot to take on. Jake was already busy with classes and research. But he thought about Vrak and the others, how they had sat guard all night because he asked them to. They had trusted him. He couldn't abandon them now. Okay, Jake said. I'll do it. Over the following weeks, life on Floor 7 changed dramatically. The cubs became Jake's constant companions. They attended his classes, sitting quietly in the back. They followed him to the library, to the labs, to the cafeteria. Where Jake went, the pack followed. At first, other students were nervous. But gradually, they realized the cubs weren't a threat anymore. Not with Jake there. The cubs still looked like fierce predators, still had claws and teeth that could kill, but they were calm now, controlled. They had found their place in the pack hierarchy, with Jake as their alpha. Jake worked with them on social skills, teaching them to greet other species properly, explaining which behaviors were acceptable and which weren't, showing them how to read body language from beings that didn't have tails or ears. The cubs learned quickly, eager to please. Vrak was especially dedicated. The big cub shadowed Jake everywhere, watching and learning. He started greeting other students with a slight nod instead of a snarl. He held doors open for smaller beings. He even attempted to make friends with a Quellan student, though the poor alien nearly fainted from fear at first. The other cubs followed Vrak's example. Within a month, they had become model students. They helped carry equipment for professors. They assisted with research projects. They volunteered for campus security patrols. The same energy they had once poured into intimidation and chaos now went into being useful members of the community. Other floors started requesting Krell students. The cubs became ambassadors for their species, showing that warriors could also be gentle, that predators could also protect. Jake's presentation to the Xenopsychology department was attended by over 100 faculty members and administrators. He explained his observations, his methods, his philosophy. He showed videos of the cubs before and after, the dramatic change in behavior. He answered questions for 2 hours. The department offered him a position as a research assistant. His work with the cubs became the foundation for new interspecies youth programs across the Galactic Council. Other students began applying his principles with different species, with varying success. It turned out Jake had a particular talent, but the basic concepts were sound. The Krell government sent an ambassador to meet Jake. The ambassador was an older warrior, covered in scars with eyes that had seen combat. He looked at Jake for a long time without speaking. "You have given our youth what we could not," the ambassador finally said. "Purpose and direction in a strange place. Honor and respect among species who feared them. This is a gift we will not forget." "I just helped them figure out who they wanted to be," Jake said. "That is everything," the ambassador replied. 6 months after that first night of howling, Jake sat in his room working on an assignment. Vrak was curled up on the floor nearby, dozing. The other cubs were scattered around the hallway, some studying, some sleeping, all content. There was a knock on the door. Jake opened it to find a new student, just arrived on the station. He was human, young, looking lost and overwhelmed. "Hi," the student said nervously. "I'm Danny Cooper. I just got assigned to this floor. Someone told me I should talk to you about the Krell." Jake smiled. "Don't worry about them. They're good kids once you get to know them. Come on, I'll introduce you." He led Danny into the hallway. Vrak woke up and stretched, yawning widely enough to show every tooth. Danny took a step back. "It's okay," Jake said. "Vrak, this is Danny. He's new. Be nice." Vrak approached slowly and dipped his head in greeting. Danny stared,